Welcome to video lecture 4, the first lecture of these two approximately 30-minute lectures on St. Thomas. St. Thomas is teaching about the one and the many. And we're going to talk about St. Thomas's teaching regarding univocity and analogy today. And we're doing this in light of the examination of his understanding of the philosophical genus that we talked about in lecture 3. The philosophical genus, if you recall, deals in a subject of wonder. And that subject of wonder I talked about extensively last time. I'm just going to do a brief review of the 4 topics that I discussed in that lecture. One was about the nature of the philosophical genus, that subject or organization, as I put it, that we experience on the sense level, that Plato says generates provocative thought, because he started to become aware of the reality of something called contrary opposition. And I spent a lot of time on last class talking about the difference between contrary opposition and contradictory opposition, and the fact that this act of wonder is a very complicated sensory and emotional and volitional intellectual act, starting in fear and terminating in satisfaction in between, since fear contains hope within it. There's a conviction about the reliability of our sense faculties, our knowing faculties, and the ability to achieve something possible, because human beings do not hope for the impossible. There has to be some sort of a natural conviction on our part in order to engage in philosophy, that the quest in which we're engaging is capable of being satisfied. So unless a person can have that kind of conviction, a person, strictly speaking, cannot be a philosopher. In order for you to do philosophy, then, to understand St. Thomas's teaching of philosophy, you have to understand how the genus of the philosopher differs from the genus of the scientist, which we went over. And I also went into more detail about the difference between the scientific genus, the philosophical genus, and the genus of the logician, because the genus of the philosopher is considered to be a subject that's being studied in order to understand the causal principles that are contained within that subject, within that organization, that give it its unity and, in a sense, its strength and unbreakability. Having done that brief review, I want to begin to talk about, and once again I'm going to refer to notes periodically, 3 crucial implications that follow from St. Thomas' teaching about genus and species. And one of the most crucial ones is, if not the most crucial one, I think, is the reality of aims in things. This teaching on the part of St. Thomas and classical thinkers in general was severely attacked, and has been severely attacked for centuries, an enemy of science, a sign of the fact that a person's thinking about science, about philosophy, is somehow backward and unsophisticated. Now, I reject that notion entirely, because to claim that there are no aims, or ends, as St. Thomas, not purposes in the sense of having an intellect in things. This is the notion of the Enlightenment. This is the notion of people like Hegel and contemporary spiritualists who are the children of the Enlightenment. This is not the teaching of Aristotle. It's not the teaching of St. Thomas. The notion of an aim is simply a common act. We might call it today a corporate act. It's the act that all of the parts of an organization are cooperating to generate, to cause, to bring into being. If there is no aims in things, if there is no aim in a thing, then it's not possible to have an organization, because it's in relationship to the common act that all the qualified members of a multitude can be unified into an organization. Organizations consist of qualified members. Those qualified or properly qualified members constitute the species within the genus. The form for Aristotle and for St. Thomas being understood to be basically a kind of quality. We get the notion of quality in Aristotle and I should say the notion of form in St. Thomas and Aristotle from the notion of quality. Not an accidental quality, but it's what St. Thomas will call an intensive quantity. So this is another notion that is going to be crucial to understand. In order to understand St. Thomas's teaching about philosophy and about science. One of the implications regarding the proper understanding of the nature of a genus is that if you reject the reality of aims, you have to reject the real existence of wholes, of part-whole relationships, of real relationships in things independently of the human mind. You have to reject the reality of organizations, and that organizations have their own causal principles that we can know by means of our own human faculties. In addition, you have to reject the notion of faculties. You have to reject the notion that the knower is comprised of part-whole relationships. That science, philosophy, is an individually generated, an individually caused act. This is one of the reasons I maintain that people who reject the classical teaching about philosophy and the difference between the scientific genus and the scientific and philosophical genus and the logical genus are incapable of explaining who or what possesses the act of science. If you reject the reality of aims in things, if you reject the reality of causes in things, you have to reject the existence of wholes, you have to reject the existence of part-whole relationships, you have to reject the reality of relationships. And you have to reject the existence of an individually causing knower. Because if causes don't exist in organizations, then there are no part-whole relationships within a human being. You have no internal faculties that somehow cooperate, like your senses, like your emotions, your imagination, and so forth, that are possessed by a single knower. How a multitude of activities can be possessed by a single knower and generate science is one of the most difficult problems to explain for a person who claims to possess science or to be doing philosophy. this is one of the reasons that I've turned my attention to St. Thomas's teaching on the role played by the psychological or the human knower as a principle of science. And once again, this is not my discovery. This is not something I came across and became aware of on my own. It was through the influence of Father Maurer at the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies, who focused attention on this dimension in St. Thomas's teaching, and has written about it. But very often what Father Maurer will do is he'll make a reference to something that I think was a dramatic discovery, and he will not celebrate it as something that he has discovered, but he'll comment that St. Thomas had said this or did this. And he did this in his translation of St. Thomas's commentary on Boethius's De Trinitate, the beginning articles of that work. If you reject the reality of aims, you're not going to be able to explain, in addition to the other things I mentioned, how an individual knower can be possessed of science. Science is comprised of many different activities, which I'm going to talk about regarding the use of analogy. And it studies many different subjects in a way, but all related to one chief subject. It can't study everything. It can't study an infinite number of things. It can only study a finite number of things. And the things that it studies have to be related to a common subject of study and to a specific habit in an individual knower. Otherwise, science has no unity. We can't explain how science is one understanding of many things. This problem of the one and the many, we come back to over and over, repeatedly, in philosophy, because that's chiefly what the act of philosophy consists in examining. I'm going to talk about, in addition to this reality of aims, this emphasis on the fact that only a faculty psychology can make intelligible the possession of science. The attempt to get rid of a human soul and faculties of a human soul and habits within this human soul makes it impossible to attribute to an individual knower the complicated psychological activity of possessing philosophy or science. Because philosophy or science is a habit. Habits in human beings presuppose the existence of memory. They presuppose the existence of the possession of many repeated acts of imagination that have been sequentialized in a memory. So we know the times and places at which they occurred and were possessed by a single intellectual faculty that also apprehends things that are going on in the senses. So without the existence of a soul and reference to the activity, the thing known as being possessed by these faculties, and constituting a single act of a single knower, science is unintelligible. So you cannot explain science in terms of an act of pure Cartesian pure reason. It becomes impossible. The complexity of the thing known, as well as the complexity of the knower, are dismissed, and we get a very narrow and misleading understanding of philosophy and of science. The third implication, the first implication I talked about was that the reality of aims is crucial to being able to understand scientific or philosophical activity. That scientific or philosophical activity is unintelligible apart from a faculty psychology, the existence of the soul. We can't consider a human being to be a collection of social feelings like Rousseau does, or like students of Rousseau do. Even if these are legislated feelings, like a Kantian might think, or enlightened feelings, these are inadequate. They don't give an adequate explanation for the unity of the knower and the unity of the thing known. The third problem is that, or the third implication is that we have to understand St. Thomas's teaching about opposition in order for us to understand how a multitude of things, in fact, including a multitude of genera, can be studied by the same science. Because a science like medicine will study a multitude of different things related to health-related beings, like what? Exercise. Exercise is not the same type of genus as is medicine, right? But medicine will study exercise, just as medicine will study many other things that are not strictly speaking the part of the chief genus that with which medicine is concerned, but inasmuch as they have a relationship to it, they have a bearing on it, are health related, then they become a part of the proper subject of the science. That's why St. Thomas and Aristotle can say that science, philosophy studies a many, a multitude, a finite multitude, and explain how this is the case. And it also is going to explain why analogy is the proper language of the philosopher, and univocity is not the proper language of the philosopher. So we have 4 topics of discussion for this class. The first, which I'm going over, these 3 crucial implications, and why univocity is the proper language of the logician, and analogy is the proper one for the philosopher. I'm going to continue with, but I want to mention the 2 other implications that we're the 2 other activities that we're going over in this course today. How virtually all of the students of St. Thomas misunderstand his teaching about analogy and univocity, basically because, and not so much univocity, but certainly analogy, because they do not understand the difference between a philosophical or scientific genus and a logical genus. If you misunderstand that, you can't understand his teaching about analogy. What I'm going to then do is to give a more precise presentation of St. Thomas's teaching on analogy, so that it becomes more comprehensible. Once you understand what is the philosophical or scientific genus, analogy does not become very difficult or complicated to understand. As far as the talk of the logician and the talk of the philosopher goes, which is often called predication, which is just a technical term. It's not something that should frighten you. It simply means how this professional uses jargon or talks about the subject in question. And for the genus that the logician predicates, the logician predicates or uses, says, in a kind of existentially neutral way. It doesn't consider that essence, that nature, that definition, which is what the genus is expressing. It doesn't express that genus or definitions that's common to all of the species as existentially related to being a cause of operation. It does not focus your attention on that aspect. So it examines it more or less from an existentially neutral standpoint. I made this point in Lecture 3 several times about the difference between the way in which members of a theology department or philosophy department will use the term department, because when they're thinking about that term, they're not thinking about it as simply a universal, something that's said universally of all departments, but they're thinking about it as it specifically applies to their understanding of a department, and that's to their organization. So it's not something that's abstract and does not apply to their organization and does not refer or include those differences in it. Those differences, those specific differences, are caused by the genus. The organization, right, is capable. Any organization as a genus is capable of taking on the specific differences, of having the specific differences grow out of the organization, so long as it's properly qualified. Just like a material that is properly qualified, like a piece of wood, can do many different things. If it's alive, if it's a tree, it can grow in many different ways with branches and leaves and so forth. If what had been the limb of a tree and now is inanimate, it can receive different types of qualities, like paint, for example, or a different shape, and so on and so forth. So when you're thinking about an organization from an operational standpoint, which is the way the philosopher and scientist considers this, or as a principle that is the generator of actions, you are not thinking about it the way a logician is thinking about it. The logician is thinking about it as sharing a common definition. That's it. Okay? And the definition is set of all of these equally. But there are some organizations that, strictly speaking, are more organizations than other ones are. That a person in business will realize this. A person, in any kind of a service organization, like a police department, a fire department, will realize this. A member of a football team or a baseball team. Some organizations are better than others, are more fully organizations, and some are not. For the logician, they're all organizations if they're organizations, if they fulfill the definition of an organization. Okay? So, the last 2 points about which deal with St. Thomas's teaching on analogy, I'm going to go into in the next video, because it has a lot of detail to it, especially explaining why most students of St. Thomas, even the most famous ones, tend to talk about analogy and misunderstand it. So I'm going to leave off now with this video, and once again, I hope I haven't gotten you much confused in this one. I hope I've clarified some things and slowly but surely, as John Dealey likes to say, slow by slow, we will get to a proper understanding and get more precision through each of these video lectures. So, see you in a little bit here. Welcome back to video lecture 4, the second lecture from video lecture 4. I had talked before about 2 of the topics in this video lecture, namely St. Thomas's teaching about genus and species and the difference between his understanding and that of the logician, and implications that followed from that. One of these implications, another one, has to do with his teaching about the way logicians and philosophers talk. And not many students, no students of St. Thomas, as far as I know, go into this when talking about St. Thomas's teaching about predication and about predicating terms analogously, univocally, and equivocally. Now, once again, that term predication should not frighten you. It's just jargon, and it's a technical terminology, much like terminology that computer geeks use, that very often will frighten people not familiar with computers, like me, sometimes. But the words shouldn't intimidate you, because all it refers to is the way in which professionals talk in their professions, and how slight differences of professional jargon are used. If you think that a scientific or philosophical genus is simply an abstractly considered essence, an essence considered, or a nature, or a definition, not considered as a generator, but you're thinking about what the definition refers to as being a generator of action, an operational definition, rather than simply an organizational definition, one telling you what all these organizations share in common. Then what's going to happen is that you're going to leave out of your understanding of your definition, your philosophical definition, the specific difference that makes this understanding of a genus a philosophical understanding of a genus. The common everyday understanding that human beings have of organizations is a generic one, and the philosophical sense of that, the scientific sense of that, is thinking about organizations as operational, as fully equipped to deliver a product, to deliver a service, you might say, to do something cooperatively and produce a corporate act, which is called the end, an organizational act. There's nothing mysterious about this notion of an aim or an end. And the notion that organizations don't have them, that organizations don't exist and they don't have cooperative aims, and they don't possess people of unequal skill, like species, who can unite their skills and unequally distribute through different departmental actions, different specific actions, a corporate aim, and so on. A strategic plan, tactical plans, which are specific operations, basically. That doesn't make much sense to people who are in touch with reality and the way we tend to live our everyday lives. It defies what most people would call common sense. the inclination on the part of a person who thinks that there's no difference between a philosophical genus and a scientific genus is to think that the philosophical genus and the scientific genus and a logical genus is to think that when we're talking about analogy or univocity, we're talking about words, terms, that is, which the logician will identify with what logicians call the predicate term. For example, if I say John is a man, or man is an animal, man being the species, animal being the genus. The term animal, right, is supposed to be the predicate term. That's the predicate. Strictly speaking, that's not correct. Logicians then have a difficult time understanding analogy because they're thinking of a predicate incorrectly. First of all, if you think about the words that are used to describe a premise or a sentence, a statement, a declarative statement, and the use of the word term, that is taken from the notion of an end and a beginning. Two terms of a relation. What a sentence expresses, or a premise, let's use the technical term instead of just a declarative statement, but let's use the logical term premise. Okay, a premise expresses an opposition, a beginning term and an end term, which are limits of intelligibility. You're saying something, so you're limiting your understanding, and you're expressing one understanding, like you say, John is a man, rather than John is a physician. These are terms, but so is the copula a term. The word is that unites, because it places limits on these other terms too. And so we talk about. You can talk about the verb also being a term. What's happened when you're predicating a term is you're saying something about the subject. That's all. Okay? So when I say a man is an animal, right? Well, in some way I'm referring everything that is being said of the subject to the subject. I'm not just saying animal of the subject. I'm saying is an animal. Man is an animal. I'm expressing a relationship between animal, a kind of unity, or lack of unity. Man is not a vegetative being. The act of predication. In the act of predication, the predicate term, is not what the logicians call the predicate term, univocity or univocal terms, equivocal terms, right, and analogous terms really refer to terms of a relationship. They in a way are the predication is an act of relating, and it's a relationship of what is said of the subject to the subject, and what's said of the subject is the connecting element as well as what is being connected. The whole thing is in a way being connected to the subject. For example, when I say that John exists, the predicate term is existence. Not in the sense that it's an essence, because it's not. But what I'm saying is existence is in John. Or John is a possessor of existence. John has the act of existing. John is a that which has the act of existing. Right? The entire relationship is being included in one understanding, so that I'm basically saying these two beings about which I am thinking are one in some way. Right? In one understanding, this two is one, or it's not. So I'm predicating chiefly the relationship. Right? Now, once again, this is not my insight. This is not something I came up with. I developed some implications of it, but the person who once again made me aware of this was Father Maurer at the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies. And just by chance, I was reading a work he had written on the philosophy of William of Ockham. One of the, I think the only work that he wrote referring to a medieval theologian of sorts, quote, quote, book anyway, that he doesn't call the Christian philosophy of such and such, but he calls the philosophy. Now, I did not come up with that either. That was Dr. Richard Ngardi at St. John's University, a colleague of mine, who mentioned that to me one day. He said, "Did you notice that Father Maurer, in coming out with this work on William of Ockham, refers to it as the philosophy of William of Ockham?" Father Maurer was being generous in making that reference, because he told me that that Ockham was actually a sophist. Or the way he put it, talk about sophists, in reference to an oblique reference he made in a note to me, or a conversation, I forget. In this work, Maurer says that in a way, analogously, you can say that you can talk about univocal terms, equivocal terms, and analogous terms, and equivocal terms, univocal terms. But strictly speaking, we are talking about the judgment. Analogy, univocity, equivocity are simply ways of referring to acts of judgment. Right? We are making judgments about a subject, or of the relationship that exists between a subject and what is being said of the subject. We're expressing the whole relationship. So if you don't think about analogy in terms of a relationship, and you try to explain it, you get in all sorts of confusion. I recall running into a student who had not specialized in St. Thomas, and who was trying to understand what he meant by analogy, and expressing extreme frustration over the fact that all that Thomists talk about, she said to me, when talking about analogy, is health. They talk about the example of health, and how health is an analogous term. And she could not understand why this is the case. For example, when you use the term health of bread and health of a human being, how is this analogous? What is the analogy? Where is it? Right? And unless you see it in terms of relationship, it's very difficult. It's impossible for you intelligibly to explain it. The general way that this is taught by students of St. Thomas, even the most famous of them, is to understand analogy and univocity and equivocity as referring to words, terms, right? Not to the relationship among the words or the terms, or to a judgment. So the term is supposed to express a definition, and the definition is supposed to be when it's a univocal one. A univocal term is a term that has an identical meaning, right? Where the word, the sign, right, is referring to an identical definition that's being said of two different things. Like the bark of a tree. That would be equivocacy. That's an example of equivocacy, where man is said of Socrates and man is said of Plato, right? It's identical definitions being referred to them. An equivocal term is where you have the same word, same spelling, or you could use foreign terms, but nonetheless, what you're expressing by in French, say, and man in English is identical as far as the definition goes. With equivocal terms, the word is the same, the vocal expression is the same, but the definition changes. So, like the bark of a dog and the bark of a tree, and logicians would be concerned about this because when you reason, you don't want to you don't want to switch your definitions, because then the syllogism will be invalid. It won't have the proper form. As far as analogy goes, well, the definition is supposed to be partly the same and partly different. Somewhat the same and somewhat different. Or sometimes what will happen is the people who are teaching this will note there's a different use, that the definition is the same but it's used in a different way. But they're not consistent in the way they express this, right? So they kind of grasp the notion that that analogy and these other ways of referring to these terms is chiefly expressing a judgmental difference, because you don't really in analogy you don't really shift your definitions. The definition remains the same throughout. When I refer to take the example of health, in the famous example that students of St. Thomas like to use, when I refer to health and I refer to John, or I refer to exercise, or I refer to medicine, or I refer to food, like if I say bread is healthy, I'm not changing the definition of health. I'm changing the relationship that I'm talking about when referring the word to John. When I say John is healthy, what I'm saying is health is in John, right? Which in philosophical or scientific predication is per se predication, right? I'm engaged in per se predication when I am identifying what it is that exists as the chief unifying principle of the organization in question, that is internally causing the organization, that generates what the definition I'm talking about. But there are other things that are related to it. There are other beings that related to it. I can refer the term health to exercise because exercise assists. It's an enabling means to maintain health. So is medicine, prescriptions, for example. So are medical instruments, medical devices. I can talk about a multitude of genera, beings that don't exist within the properly speaking, the proper understanding of health as internal to John. but nonetheless, they are the proper subjects of study of the science of medicine. Right? So if all I consider with respect to the science of medicine is what is essential to health in a human being as causing health within John, then these accidental relationships that are there to maintain health and so forth would not be proper subjects of study of medicine. But they are. Right? The logician can't explain that. This is why the logician can't explain how the four causes of Aristotle are related to analogous predication, right, in science, and why if you think that that scientific predication or per se predication is univocal predication, you will misunderstand what St. Thomas is talking about, because it's an analogous predication. An analogous predication maintains the unity of that definition, and the definitional meaning, right, is not the complete meaning or the total understanding, right, that is achieved in achieving science. So what you have to have when you have philosophical or scientific understanding is a complete sense is both unity of definitional meaning and unity which is conceptual, expressing this single definition, and judgmental meaning, so that your total understanding is one, has unity to it. So when I'm saying, for example, that or talking scientifically and talking analogously or talking philosophically and talking analogously, I am taking into consideration nuances of difference in the relationship that this multitude has to this chief causal activity that exists within the scientific subject. Right? With respect to different organizations, you have to understand the chief aim of the organization. What is chiefly concerned about doing or making, for example, right? And anything that has a relationship, an essential relationship to exercising that business activity or that service activity, fighting fires, fighting crime, or helping to improve public respect for law, public safety, the public health. All of these relate to these different organizations in different ways. And when I'm talking analogously, right, I'm expressing unequal relationships, that these multitude of things, some of which don't strictly speaking belong to the scientific subject as health in John, right, but can nonetheless be said of it as part of the proper subject of science or philosophical study, because they essentially relate to maintaining it, to improving it. Right? They have a reference to its unity. They have a relationship to the unity of this thing, and therefore what Aristotelians would commonly call accidents, things that are not strictly essential to health in John, do become essential to the scientific study of John's health, or John's wealth, say, in economics, or John's peace, or John's lack of peace, or John's education, and so on. And this explains how these multitude of things that are, strictly speaking, not essences in the Aristotelian sense, but are accidents, become part of the essence of science when analogously understood. And when you focus attention on the fact that analogy involves total meaning, and not simply conceptual meaning, that when we're talking about the total meaning involved in scientific talk, very often what happens is the way we say things is the opposite of the way, it has the opposite meaning in total meaning than what we say when we're considering simply logical meaning of an essence. For example, if one person observes another person doing something stupid that the person considers stupid and says, "Gee, that's brilliant." Now, what the person has done is engaged in a kind of complicated analogy here, a kind of ironic expression, using the word brilliant to express the opposite definition of stupid. But if you think that of definitions simply in terms of univocity or equivocacy, or just having a meaning that's somewhat, a definition that's somewhat the same, somewhat different, it's not. What you're doing is you've taken a totally different definition and applied it. But you've applied it in a way that's intelligible to some other to the person you're talking about, or talking to, so that it becomes comprehensible. Right? So analogy then, usually what happens is students of St. Thomas talk about it in terms of what they call extrinsic attribution, where they note this, and I'm not concerned that you understand the nuances of these ways of talking, but they'll understand that there is a level of reference in which within a genus you're referring to something in relationship to health. Human beings, for example, being more or less healthy, having different levels of health, of internal health. And then they'll talk about analogy of proportion, analogy of proportionality, analogy of proper proportionality is different from analogy of proportion, and analogy of being. Right? Now, I focus attention on analogy with respect to predication, and students of St. Thomas are right to focus attention on the fact that the way we talk in relating terms or making judgments about the way a definition is being referred to a subject is based upon an unequal relationship, which they express by the terminology of possession, of existence in different things. But St. Thomas, for the most part, doesn't talk about analogy of being. He makes note of it, right? And it's crucial to understand because of the nuanced differences it'll cause when you're making reference to the ways in which you talk in science. He's focusing attention in his own mind on these nuances of different ways of existence that causes will manifest. But the science itself, the science considered in itself, focuses attention on the fact that, okay, this has a different way of existing than something else does, and I have to understand, therefore, that the proper way for me to talk is analogy. Right? And the analogy refers to both beings that exist within a genus, like I'm talking about John having health in him, right? And people unequally possessed of health, as well as things that, properly speaking, don't belong to that genus at all when you're just talking about their own natures. Like running, for example, or walking. Well, if I'm walking for health, I'm walking in relationship to it, or if I'm running in relationship to it, it becomes health related. And it becomes, properly speaking, something of medical concern. Other than that, it's incidental, it's accidental to it. So now, one other thing about I want to mention here about predication, because or talk in general, and that's just to go back to this to emphasizing the fact that the predication of terms really has to do with relating what is said of a subject to the subject. And once again, you're not going to focus attention on that aspect of the nature of predication and not understand St. Thomas's teaching about the nature of predication properly, unless you understand that the genus of the philosopher and the genus of the logician are different. Now, St. Thomas himself does not go into a lengthy discussion of what he means by predication. You find it in different locations, and very often just through examples that he's using. The same thing is with analogy. He talks very little about analogy, but uses it, and you kind of have to dig out the meaning of analogy. I hope what I've done today for you is to give you a more intelligible account, a more simplified account of what it is. And in subsequent lectures, I'll come back to it. And if you go over the transcript that I've written, I go into more detail on this. But I'm not concerned that you understand the popular Thomistic or the popular way students of St. Thomas express his teaching on analogy, because they've got it for the most part wrong. And I think that at least that's what I consider to be the case. And if I'm wrong, I hope they'll correct me on it, so that I won't continue making these mistakes. But I'm used to making mistakes, and I don't mind having them being pointed out to me in public even. So, well, it depends upon the mistake. But anyway, we'll see you next time.